The influence fairy tales have on children's development is glaringly evident worldwide. Disney Animation Studios specifically has one of the strongest impacts on children in Western countries because of their reimagining of children's fairy tales. Disney is now the blueprint of creating engaging stories for children, so they have immense power and influence over what makes a real fairy tale. Unfortunately, though, the Disney formula, if you will, relies on reinforcing patriarchal and Eurocentric ideals for children to consume, thus shaping their perception of themselves and society, myself included. I like to call this Section 1 Snow White supremacy. So, in both the original and Disney adaptation of the story, The Fairness of Snow White's skin measured not only the beauty, but also the value of the young princess. Writer Wan Chow, I hope I'm not butchering that, elaborates that when viewing Snow White critically, it becomes apparent that it offered an image of youthful female beauty and desirability which must have affected generations of Black children who found themselves classified by implication as permanently inferior. Whiteness and goodness are insistently related in the movie. The mere phenotypic characterization of Snow White subtly reinforces white supremacy. Although the prejudiced messages in fairy tales may appear latent, children's impressionable minds can be heavily influenced by various forms of media. Experiments such as the doll test, where children of color were asked to choose between a white doll and a black doll, asking which one was good, prettier, or kinder. The children typically chose the white doll. The experiment was originally conducted in 1940 by Dr. Kenneth and Mamie Clark in Brown versus Board of Education, and has been replicated on multiple occasions, bearing the same results. Children of color feel inferior to their white counterparts. Exposure to fairy tales and stories that continuously disregard key elements of a child's identity can interfere with children's developmental morale, proving the importance of stories that positively portray characters of different backgrounds. And obviously we all think of Tiana here, but Princess and the Frog still misses a few marks, but we'll get to that. Section 2. Rules of femininity according to a princess.
Do a plie and never fall. Don't ever stray from protocol.
Rule number 1. To be a princess, you must be subservient to men. The plot of Snow White and Sleeping Beauty specifically relies on the presence of a prince to reach a resolution. Both princesses are only saved when a prince comes to their aid, the true love's kiss, teaching children that a woman needs a man present in her life to survive and that a woman is incapable of fending for herself. These sexist ideals and themes are one of the few elements that exist in both the modernized fairy tales presented by Disney and the Brothers Grimm fairy tales from over 100 years ago. Society progressed past the outdated notion that women should be meek and subservient, but traditional fairy tales relay this prejudicial information to young and impressionable viewers at the ripe age of 5. Rule number 2. To be a princess, you must never dance with Abigail in the woods. Feminist scholar Elizabeth Yauman points out that rather than encouraging female empowerment with strong female leads, old-fashioned fairy tales tend to villainize the assertive woman, casting them as witches, and witches are typically wicked, and females other than witches are often victims who survive only because they are rescued by men. Rule number 3. To be a princess, you must worship everything masculine, but also you can't do anything traditionally masculine. Although the impact of a few children's fairy tales can appear harmless, studies surrounding girls' self-esteem suggest that girls grow up learning to view femininity as a sign of weakness or inferiority. We all remember the viral Like a Girl video from a few years back. The experiment performed for the Like a Girl campaign by Always in 2014 provided the means necessary for a wider audience to truly understand the gender roles we reinforce corrupts the mind of prepubescent girls. Experiment, they asked a group of girls and boys of different ages to perform basic tasks, such as running or throwing like a girl. but the only test subjects who performed these tasks normally were under age 12, and they were girls. Everyone else completed the tasks in a stereotypical fashion, making jokes about girls' obsession with their appearance. The sadly unsurprising results of the experiment demonstrate the negative connotations that are now associated with performing daily tasks or experiences like a girl. As we approach the fifth wave of feminism, it is crucial that the stories embedded in a person's childhood represent their identity in a positive light to stop the chain of self-hatred towards one's gender. Section 3, Psychology and Why Kids Value Fairy Tales So Much.
Wouldn't you think I'm the girl who has...
Intentionally or not, authors of classic fairy tales heavily influence a child's perception of the world and their environment. Chow asserts that they actively insert their views of what it means to be children, and more specifically, what it means to be boys or girls are embedded in their narratives for children. Children as young as 4 or 5 years old already have pre-existing knowledge, anticipation of how princes and princesses should look and act in fairy tales. This explains why the aforementioned gender roles in fairy tales have such a monumental effect on a child's development. The target audience for fairy tales told by studios such as Disney, these authors try to bolster the preconceived notion of gender and class roles according to the patriarchal codes of the time, essentially exploiting the naivete of children to externalize their beliefs. Eliminating the use of fairy tales as means for basic morals and lessons is not the solution for children's faltered belief systems. Scholar Brianna May suggests the individual learns about society through observation. A child becomes aware of the advantages one child has over another because of their socialization experience. Rather, the most effective method in telling fairy tales can focus on adapting myths and stories for an international audience to demonstrate a wider range of identities and experiences. Now, Disney has attempted to do this on multiple occasions, and Disney did this with Tiana back in 2009, but I actually have a few bones to pick with this specific representation. So, yes, Tiana has many admirable qualities that I valued when I saw the movie at 5 years old. But it's really frustrating that my only representation of a Black Disney princess is literally a frog for the majority of the movie. And people can argue that this is becoming a pattern with some Disney animated movies and other animated movies from other studios, but I won't really get into that right now. I don't want to grow up to be a frog, and that's not even the worst part. It makes perfect sense that you can turn Naveen, the prince in the movie, into a frog because he can actually learn something from it. He starts the movie as a spoiled and privileged boy that can't even chop vegetables. But Tiana could have easily learned her lesson to value love over work without being turned into a literal frog. To this day, Princess and the Frog still rubs me the wrong way because as of right now, Disney has no intention of making another Black Disney princess. It's almost as if they half-assed one and were like, okay, cool, we have our token Black princess. Moving on. It just kind of sucks that white girls will have 8 princesses and counting. That represents them, but Black girls will only have 1. And you can honestly argue the same thing with the other POC princesses. But that's not to say Disney hasn't improved over the years. In recent years, Disney released princess movies such as Moana and Raya and the Last Dragon, inspired by Polynesian and South Asian myths that follow strong female leads who challenge gender roles and racial stereotypes in contrast to the Brothers Grimm's fairy tales Disney typically adapts. By exploring myths and fairy tales outside of European cultures, storytellers can develop more representative stories into modern classics and solidify inclusivity within a child's psyche. The fairy tales Western cultures tend to cherish, praise, and pass on from generation to generation. Unfortunately, also pass along harmful racial and gender stereotypes. Considering the impact that these commonplace tales have on children's development, it is evident that the lessons we teach, good or bad, are embedded in a child's belief system. Disney Studios, which is known for adding on to this trend, can now provide audiences with a sense of hope as they develop stories that defy the gender norms and racial stereotypes that consume our culture. I mean, if we finally manage to get through the live action remake phase. See you next time. Bye.